Good morning, everybody. I hope that you are well today, although you may not be watching this in the morning. This is the March mid-month MARGHA teaching, and I'm going to go through the reading for March, particularly the reading in the Royal Seal of Mahamudra. We've gotten some emails from mitras who've been expressing that the languaging and some of the topics that are brought up in this reading aren't as familiar to people. And so I thought maybe I would just try to unpack a little bit the section in the Royal Seal of Mahamudra, pages 41 through 52. So if you have your book, it might be helpful just to follow along, although you don't have to. You can, hopefully what I have to say will be clear enough without having to look directly at the text itself. Before we look at it, I wanted to say something briefly just about the trajectory of this year in the MARGHA program. I think it helps all of us to just keep in mind the larger view of the point of this natural meditation or natural awareness year in the MARGHA program. And essentially the whole point of the year is to begin to develop a direct relationship to an ability to rest in the nature of the mind itself, in natural awareness. So from the perspective of the Mahamudra path, which is where obviously most of these teachings are coming from, that process takes place through a series of practices. And the practices include the practices of shamatha, which are what we are focusing on for the first 6 months, and then on the practices of vipassana. And the practices of shamatha have a particular purpose, and their purpose is to steady, stabilize, train, and you could say relax our minds out of their usual habits of continual distraction and being pulled in multiple directions. We're often pulled in multiple directions by the various thoughts that arise and then the emotions that might follow on those. So shamatha is considered to be kind of the basic ground of recognizing the nature of the mind. If you don't have a stable mind, if you don't have a clear mind, if you don't have a mind that can really fundamentally remain non-distracted for a little while, it doesn't have to be for a long while, but for a little while, then it's difficult to contact the nature of the mind directly. We can have hints, we can have ideas, but to have an actual experience, we need the mind to quiet down and settle down a little bit. So the practices we're working on over this 6 months are meant to begin that process. And it's kind of a lifetime process. It's not something you stop doing at the end of these 6 months, but these 6 months are meant to give a kind of deep grounding in the practices of shamatha and the various forms that shamatha practice can take. So, because there are multiple ways to practice shamatha, and one or another might work better for you than another one. And so we're giving you a range of different options that you can choose from. Like when we're done with these 6 months, you will be the determiner of which shamatha practice works the best for you, and you can continue with that one, or you can switch it off to maintain some kind of freshness with the practice. But that's really the point of these teachings that we're reading this month and the practices that we're doing. In the second 6 months, we'll be going on and doing the practices of vipassana, which are the practices of inquiry into the nature of the mind itself. And those practices are premised on the idea that our minds have quieted a little bit and that we are able to rest non-distractedly here and there. Again, it doesn't have to be, you're going to rest for an hour. Maybe we can rest for 2 or 3 minutes, or even a minute. But our mind stream has begun to take on the shape, to be formed in a way that allows the thinking mind to really drop down and settle in the body and opens up the space and the clarity of the mind and the innate peacefulness of the mind as well. So I'm not going to say much about Vipassana right now because we'll have plenty of time to talk about that at the summer retreat and then over the next 6 months after that. So this March's teachings are beginning to look at different forms of shamatha. We spent the last month working on earth body shamatha, which is, in my opinion, at least one of the most grounding and I find it one of the most settling forms of the meditations that we're teaching, because there's something about that undeniable sensation at the base of the body that pulls the physical and the conceptual energy in the body down and grounds it in the earth, grounds it in the body. And personally, I have found that practice to be one of my favorites. It's one that I continue to do, even if I don't do all of these other ones. So now we're moving on to, though, working with shamatha with a physical object. And the teaching in the Royal Seal of Mahamudra is laying the stage for the necessity of shamatha and then going into a little bit of the detail on how you practice shamatha. But it does bring up a number of topics that we haven't talked about. Some of you may be familiar with these topics already, and others of you may never really have heard much about them. And also, this book uses some different kinds of terminologies, which are referring to things we have talked about, but it's not crystal clear that that's what's happening. So I'll just start. I'm going to start on page 42 with the section that begins deciding that the mind is the root of the whole of samsara and nirvana. You could say that this is really the view, right? And the view of why, the view that is trying to show us that the point is that we have to work with mind itself, that it doesn't make any sense to work with anything else. You can't, working with external objects, working with some seemingly outer situation is not the way to tame the mind. You actually have, all we have actually is this mind, and that's where we have to start. So the first point that he makes is that this mind, our minds, and our relationship to what arises in our experience is the whole of our life. That's really actually all there is. We have these ideas that there's that so much more is happening. But when it really comes down to it, and if you really look carefully into the nature of the mind and into the mind, you start to see that the mind is actually the source of everything. And mind here doesn't refer to conceptual mind, right? Here we're really talking about nature of mind. We're talking about natural awareness, rigpa, that kind of base continuity of our existence is this natural awareness. And so that is the source of everything that we experience. It's the ground. It's said to be the groundless ground of our experience. And it cannot be, one of the fundamental points that gets made over and over again in both Dzogchen and Mahamudra is that mind essence, that natural awareness can't be stained. It can't be altered. It can't be changed. It can only be obscured. In other words, what happens is that because we don't recognize it, that gives rise, what arises from the nature of the mind, because the nature of the mind isn't static. It's not a void. It's not just empty space. It's productive. It's fertile, and it's constantly energetic. Energy is arising, you could say, from the nature of the mind. Because we haven't recognized the nature of the mind, we also mistake the energy arising, and we create a dualistic relationship with the energy that's arising. We separate some sense of I from my experience, what's arising, and we latch on to what's arising as real. And that is said to be the root cause of all of our suffering, that we become attached to these arisings as real, and we expect certain things from them. And that leads to a host of problems, all kinds of emotions and habits and reactivities. If we were able to recognize the nature of mind itself like fully recognized, then we would have the ability to also recognize everything that arises in our experience as an expression of that nature, as an active, dynamic, alive dimension of that nature. But part of the problem is that we have obscurations. There are veils that are in the way of us doing that easily. Although, as we've said in our retreats, we all have had moments where those veils have thinned or they've dropped away, and we have had direct connection, direct relationship to the nature of the mind. So, since we haven't recognized this natural awareness, then we start to believe that our mind, that mind itself, really only consists of conceptual thoughts, emotions, ideas, and sensory experiences. We think that's the sum total of who we are, of what we are. And we get hooked into those experiences, and we fuel them. We give them what they need to continue to proliferate. And that keeps us hooked even more. That keeps us going more and more and more. We don't understand, we don't see that they are merely energy, expression arising and dwelling and dissolving, waxing and waning, coming and going. It's a very fluid situation. And it's because we lock on to our experience that we create more and more reification, and we start to experience things as very solid, very entrapping, a way in which we're entrapped in our experience. From that kind of a conversation, then he begins to talk about karma. And, karma's a big topic, but based on a simple understanding of karma, and I think it's most helpful for us at this point to maintain a simple understanding of it, is that what karma is the patterns that we continue to solidify by feeding them, and the patterns of distraction, the patterns of reactivity, the patterns of emotional disturbance. We all have these patterns. We all have them. We've had them, it's said, for countless lifetimes. And we can either strengthen them in a given lifetime, or we can begin to weaken them. We can actually begin to let them dissolve. But the more we strengthen them, the more power these patterns have, and the more they have a momentum of their own, which is why it can feel like with a really ingrained or deeply for me, I would say the habit of anxiety, which is something that I have seen myself, even in the course of just this one lifetime, continue to engage with. And over time, I've actually seen how that pattern has gained in strength, so that now, or over the last 20 years or so, when I've been working with it more directly, I really have to work with the energy of that pattern, because it's very strong. It wants to drag me into the full-blown, neurotic expression of itself, where I'm just, caught up in all the things that might happen, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So we increase our karmic suffering by feeding our karma, by feeding these patterns, these afflictions, these habits with more and more thinking, more and more anxiety, more and more energy, you could say. We give it to them. And then it continues to ripen. And as it ripens, that energy, that powerful energy, sweeps us along with it. And we don't have a lot of control. We feel very much at the mercy of that. That's what's known as samsara, right? This is a cycle that just repeats itself. Even in the course of one lifetime, we might cycle in and out of states of extreme anxiety. I'm just going to use that as an example, although that everyone has their own set of patterns. So that's samsara. That's the miniature version of like what we experience as samsara. And it's not, I shouldn't say miniature, because it broadens itself into how we perceive the whole of our experience, so that we actually start to see the whole outer world colored through these glasses of our karmic energy. We're like so caught in that feeling that everything we then perceive through our senses is colored by that. We're not seeing things very clearly. We're not seeing them as they are. We're seeing them through that distortion of being hooked into our own energies in various ways. So the only way that this karma can begin to unravel is that it has to exhaust itself, and it has to do that naturally. And the only way that it can exhaust itself is that we have to leave it alone. We have to drop the project of feeding it. We have to relax all of our effort to do something about how we feel or what we're thinking. And we simply remain aware of what is taking place. So it's like dropping out of the thought process around what we're experiencing and settling into the allowing the energy of it. So like, what's the energy of anxiety? How do I experience that energy in my body? If I could let that energy just, move through, I feel the tightening in the chest and the flutteriness and the sense of kind of panic and just hold with that. This is Pema Chodron's holding still in the middle of the fire. You just rest with it and you don't do anything. Don't do anything. And what happens is that then that energy starts to just change. It changes. It starts to dissolve. It starts to relax. It starts to melt. And even in one sitting, you can experience then like an anxiety, an anxiety attack that just comes, dwells for a while, and then dissolves. Now that doesn't mean the larger pattern is completely dissolved, but it's a really good beginning, because then you just continue that process every time you notice that you start getting hooked. So when he starts talking about this actual root cause of suffering for wandering in samsara is that the present mind has not recognized its original face, that it's carried away by distraction and delusion, and it has not made awareness prevail. This is kind of what's being talked about. We're so caught up in this situation of our own engagement with the energy arising from the nature of our own mind, that we're lost in this little world of our own creation. We really are. We're lost in this situation. And I want to read you just something from Anam Tupten, because he talks about the distinction between being caught up in this way, which he uses the verb, and we've used it before, actually, at NDF quite a bit, the notion of selfing. This is the project of selfing. And, to exhaust our karma, we have to drop that project. We have to just let it go, relax it. But I wanted to read something that he says about this notion of selfing and then unselfing. How we're moving from being caught up in our karma, feeding it, building it, growing it, to letting go, just letting go. He says, and this is from The Magic of Awareness. I heard that someone is using a verb, selfing. This verb, selfing, is a very accurate description of how we are creating and maintaining the shell-like falsehood of who we are. Most people are actually selfing all day. We are selfing all day when we are already ourselves. If we look into a mirror, what do we say? Oh, I don't like my hair. This is selfing. Then we talk to someone. Oh, I don't like this person. Or, this person has very good manners and I want to hang out with this person. Maybe I can get something from this person. Can you see that we are always engaging in this mental compulsion, this constant selfing? And we go to temples and we pray to some kind of divine entity, hoping that we will be successful and that we will be redeemed before anybody else. That's another way of selfing. It's a beautiful way of selfing. It's called holy selfing. But it's still selfing. It's another way of constructing this misperception of who we are. It has nothing to do with the truth. It has nothing to do with pure awareness. So humanity has been lost in this vicious cycle, beautifully and dreadfully through eons and eons, this vicious circle which is the process of selfing. And of course there are remarkable individuals such as Buddha, Nagarjuna, Padmasambhava, and Machiglabdrung who knew how to stop that process and set themselves free from that circle. Of course there are many who have had the courage to break that vicious circle in their very lifetime, and those remarkable individuals came from every tradition, not only the Buddhist tradition. And you can be one of those remarkable individuals. Why not? So the true spiritual practice is actually unselfing. Most people don't know what that is all about. They only know the process of selfing. So most people's minds are residing in this diluted reality, the reality of selfing. They are always selfing. And then finally, when we have that wisdom, when we know how to turn our attention inward, we have the desire to find everything inside, not somewhere else. We want to have salvation that belongs always to this moment, that never belongs to any other moment. That's an interesting phrase. He's really pushing this idea of the present moment is our opportunity. When that intention is very strong, then there is also attention. Attention comes with intention. Intention leads to attention. And then something extraordinary happens. And then we have the possibility to come close to the mind of Buddha, the awareness, the opening heart, the liberation, the taste of the supreme truth. We begin to actually experience all of them in every moment when we have the taste of liberation. And that is the process of unselfing. So when we have experiential understanding of this notion of unselfing, that means we have recognized the truth, meaning natural awareness. We have glimpsed the truth and have realized our true nature. From that moment on, there is a beautiful dance that happens in our consciousness. The dance is the dance between awareness and unawareness. It is the dance between selfing and unselfing. It is a beautiful dance because in one moment, we are in the realm of awareness and we are unselfing, and in the next moment, we might be in the realm of unawareness and we are selfing. This dance will continue for a long time. Do not try to have any hope beyond this beautiful dance. This dance is what we need. And do not try to long for some kind of great eternal liberation, which does not happen very often. There is no eternal unselfing. Do not expect that you are going to run into eternal liberation. It's the idea, eternal liberation is the idea that you are always residing permanently, uninterruptedly in the realm of supreme awareness. This may exist as a possibility, but do not expect it, because when you expect it, then your attention will be focused on that, and you will not know how to enjoy this beautiful dance, the dance between awareness and unawareness. So I think that just gives us a better sense of this process that is really the process of our practice at this point. We are very much in this phase of dancing, and we may have moments and even long sessions on the cushion of unselfing where we're simply able to just let go, let things arise, let them dissolve, and then we get up off the cushion and you get an email that's obnoxious and right away you're just locked in, and you're selfing. There's a story, right away. So the journey is definitely a journey of going back and forth and of continuing to grow our capacity to allow our experience to just be what it is and not get so involved, so attached, so reactive, etc., etc. Shamatha practice is a very, very powerful way of supporting this dance between selfing and unselfing. Coming back to the Royal Seal of Mahamudra, and just to continue the logic of where we were, where he's working on establishing this view that everything that we experience, all of the samsaric difficult, what we call samsara, our suffering, this cycle of going round and round in our own attachment, arises from the nature of the mind itself. And our distorted view, our inability to recognize what that is. Nirvana is also mind. Nirvana here means that we do recognize the nature of the mind, that we are able to just allow things to be exactly what they are, energy unfolding in space, and we are present. We're present with complete awareness in that experience. Because when we're present with awareness, our delusions are cleansed. Karma exhausts itself. So the more our delusions dissolve, the more our true ground, our natural awareness, begins to move into the foreground of our experience. And we notice it. We notice it more and more. He says this, he uses this phrase on page 44. He says, the truth of the ground. The truth of the ground is natural awareness. You could say truth of the ground equals natural awareness. And it's a constant, unchanging, all-pervasive situation, which is why it's called the ground. It's not static, it has energy, it's expressive, and yet it is, it's the one constant. It's the one constant. It's the one situation that is not bound by the laws of impermanence, interestingly. It's the real foundation, the true foundation. And yet, again, here we are, I'm using these concepts to describe something which is indescribable because it does not exist in the realm of the conceptual mind. It just doesn't exist there. So, but it's the foundation for our experience, and our experience arises as an expression of that. So that's kind of his first point. Let's, establishing here is where we need to work. We need to work with this situation that we have right now, this mind, whether it's the distorted mind or it's the clear mind. We work with that. That's where we work. His second point then is that our present mind is not only the source for our individual suffering, our individual samsara and nirvana, but it's also the source of the outer world and its inhabitants. Now, this is something that takes a little bit of exploring, because the idea here is that outer phenomena don't exist in a separate, unchanging, solid way. And that's how we, whether or not you intellectually believe that, we all believe that emotionally. We have an emotional sense that things are out there, right? That they're solid, we know intellectually that they're changing, but, when I look at my coffee mug, it doesn't look to me like it's changing. If I drop it on the floor and it breaks, yes, then it's changed. But I'm not seeing the breakdown of molecules and their, liberation into energy when I look at this, right? I'm not. It looks pretty solid. It looks pretty external. And here the premise is that actually what we're experiencing as solid and fixed is a habit. It's, in other words, we've become so habituated to othering and experiencing from a dualistic perspective that we have, over countless lifetimes, solidified our sense of relationship between inner and outer. That is a very strong sense of distinction that we experience between inner and outer. And Khamtrul Rinpoche gives the example of, he's trying to help us understand that, in fact, what we're experiencing is really an expression of our own karmic makeup at this time, and that different beings in different karmic situations experience the exact same outer situations in a very different way. So on the top of page 45, he goes through this list of the beings in the 6 realms of existence and how they all experience water in a different way. This is a very common example. So that, in other words, the realm that you exist in, that we live in, is a expression of our karmic situation. Human beings have a shared karma as well as individual karma. So therefore, we all can say we perceive water in more or less the same way. But even in that case, our individual karma has minute variations in which I can't say that what I think of as water is exactly what every one of you thinks of as water. It's slightly different for each of us, but it's not radically different in the way that he describes how a hungry ghost in the hungry ghost realm experiences water as pus and blood. So this takes a little working your mind around, right? It's hard to shift out of our sense of a kind of the belief that we've really ingrained that things exist in exactly the way we perceive them, which is essentially we're being told here, and that's not true. That there is what we're seeing is the karmic projection of our own minds. If karma were to really dissolve, that perception would also dissolve, and we would see something different. We'd experience something different. And in a way, you could say this is why the phenomenal world, or how the phenomenal world can become a teacher for us. Because if we could experience reality as it is, not through the karmic lens, it's a much more fluid, constantly changing situation without any inherently existing essence. And that would wake us up. That would wake us up on the spot. So I won't go too much more into that. I think I'll let everyone kind of wrestle with it. It is something you kind of wrestle with for a while. And then you may actually have an experience at some point in meditation, if you do some long meditation, where you that sense of solidity fades a little, and you have a kind of direct experience of a lack of separation. And suddenly things are much less solid and much more dreamlike, much more illusory, you could say. And it helps shake up this solid sense of things. Or you may already have had those experiences. Again, many of us have had these experiences over and over again, just in little tiny minute, bites, or maybe larger bites. I mean, I don't want to speak for people. On page 45, towards the bottom of the page, he says, this mind has existed from timeless samsara without beginning. So what does that mean? This is one of those phrases that you read and you're like, right. Timeless samsara without beginning. So really what it means is that when we abide in the present moment, the idea of past, present, and future dissolves. They collapse. And there isn't anything other than the present moment. And most of the time for us, we experience that as a flash. It's just this instant, this present instant, and then we're thrust into the next moment by the habit of projection into a future. Or we're seduced by the seeming reality of what we've experienced in the past and the memory of that, or into the the ruminations on what's happening now, and that we're missing this eternal moment, this eternally present moment right here, right now. So, you may remember from the winter retreat, we spent a lot of time sort of working with just being present and noticing when we were distracted and coming back to the present, this training and returning to being present, which is a real training. It's a real training. Because the proliferation of this conceptual mind has seduced us into believing that, into a very solid idea of time and who we are in relation to time. We see ourselves as extended along a narrative arc, and it gives us a more solidified sense that we exist, because we can tell the narrative of me. We've got a discourse that is kind of at the core of our sense of being. And we use that discourse. I was born here, I lived here, I had this job, I did that, I have these experiences, I'm planning on this, and I'm, in this moment, I'm this person. And we continue to sort of we continue to just extend and develop and elaborate that narrative. But really, in essence, that narrative is nothing more than a line drawn in the water. In its essence, it's continuously dissolving, and we are continuously having to recreate it, which takes a whole lot of energy. It takes a whole lot of energy. It's like we've got a chisel and a hammer, and we're like working away at engraving that narrative in the rock. My narrative. But on the ultimate level, it's a continuously dissolving situation. And I think that we know that. Existentially, we know that. We experience that. And there's a kind of underlying feeling at the base of who we are that has a lot of anxiety about this. And again, that's said to be one of the results of having for so many eons not recognized the nature of the mind, is that we have this fear that if we let go of that narrative, there's some kind of nothingness, that it's all nothing and meaninglessness. And we have sort of fundamentally misunderstood that the nature of our being as a luminous, wise, compassionate situation that can be a benefit. So let me just turn the page here. So that kind of brings us to the bottom of page 46, because the whole point here is, again, that everything comes back to what we experience from the mind itself, from the distorted mind and from the pure mind, so to speak. And, again, you can say, it's said that even sense perceptions are experienced by the mind, that yes, we have the faculty of sight, we have eyes, and therefore we can see, but what actually sees is not the eyes. The eyes only provide us with the ability to see, but what actually sees is the mind itself. What actually hears is the mind itself. If you have a problem with one of these faculties, one of these organs of sight or sound, then you can't see, or you can't hear. But it's because there's a problem with the physical situation, not because there's a problem with the mind. The mind can see, the mind can hear, the mind can feel. Once the mind has departed the body, once the body has broken down and decayed and died, then there's no more possibility for the consciousness to see, hear, taste, touch, feel, right? Until it's re-embodied. So what actually sees, hears, smells, feels, tastes, touches is, or feels, I should say, is the mind itself, is consciousness. And I'm using those terms interchangeably here. Only consciousness experiences, and therefore it's only consciousness that can free us from our own confusion. So that first part of the book is trying to convince us that the only way to change our experience from suffering to liberation is to work with what's right here, right now, this mind itself. There's no other place to go, no other place. And this mind, which is kind of wild, which controls us a lot of the time, has to be calmed down, pacified. Sometimes the term is purified, because it's kind of caught up in these negative habits, and trained. It can be trained. The mind is incredibly flexible and malleable, and it can be trained to take us deeper and deeper into our own nature. And that's where we have to go. And this book also, by the way, if you haven't read, it's a wonderful book. And the sections I read were on page 64 through 66. But Anam Thupten talks so much about the inward journey, that we're taking a journey into the mind itself. We're not going anywhere else. We're actually turning in. So bottom of page 46, he then moves on to talk about how the main point of meditation is non-distraction, undistracted mindfulness. And he uses this language, which is a little confusing, and he talks about severing the root of the mind. And that's a kind of strong language, but really it just means that we are taming the mind and capturing awareness itself. Capturing meaning in your own experience, when you look at your experience, you start to be able to know what is awareness. Know in the sense of you recognize it in your experience, you see it in your experience, and then you learn to rest with it. More and more and more, you learn to rest with it. But in order for that to happen, we have to calm down this addiction to thinking, distraction, agitation, excitement, and lassitude. And we have to train ourselves to remain undistracted by all of that movement. Because when we're distracted, and I've said this a number of times, and because somehow it just really resonates for me, there are only two states of mind, right? There's distracted mind and there's present mind. That's it. See if you can find anything else. There isn't anything else. That's it. Two states, distracted or present. So undistracted mindfulness fundamentally it means recognizing natural awareness, the nature of the mind, and sustaining it. In other words, not being distracted from it. It's not like there's anything to sustain in the sense that you have to create this natural awareness. No, sustaining it simply means that you remain undistracted and aware within your own awareness, basically. That's what it means. So undistracted mindfulness is being able to remain present and aware of everything that unfolds, because of course still the mind is going to be active and things are going to unfold. Thoughts are going to arise, emotions are going to arise, sensory perceptions will arise, and our path is to learn how to be present in the midst of all of that unfolding. So now this book is going to focus on techniques for achieving this kind of non-distraction. How do we do it? And it's very practical from here on, like it becomes instruction, precise instruction in how to maintain non-distraction, how to cultivate and maintain non-distraction. And initially there's this instruction, and this is on page 49, where he talks about settling the mind after cutting off the conceptual constructs of the 3 times. And so this is like one of the very first and sort of most foundationally important instructions, which is this notion that we have to correct our habit of following after the past and getting lost in memories and thoughts, or I should say, anticipating the future. And, I'm sure you all have had the experience of creating an entire future in, the course of an hour on the cushion. You're suddenly the rest of your life has unfolded itself. And then the bell rings and you're back to the present moment. Or even the habit of examining our present moment experience, in this kind of talking to oneself over and over again in the moment. Am I doing it right? Is that it? Is that awareness? I wonder if everyone else is doing it. All of that goes on. So when we turn the mind inward, we're turning in, and the mind is beginning to look into itself and to settle in its own nature. And the instruction is to rest right in the continuity of that natural awareness, which is uncontrived, which means you don't have to make it up. It's already a basic component of our existence. It's the main component of our existence in a sense. So it's uncontrived. And again, you don't imagine it. You don't imagine that there's some experience that you're having. If you notice yourself doing that and there's effort going towards that, that's just another example of thinking, another example of ruminating in the moment. So resting right in the midst of the continuity of this natural awareness, that's actually the basic shamatha instruction. Not that easy to do. And therefore then shamatha has a range of different forms that help us move closer and closer to this idea of shamatha without any support at all. So we use support in the beginning because it's pretty tough to jump right into the continuity of the nature of the mind and hold in that, be present in that all the time. That's a tall order. So initially what we're doing is we're working on building the capacity of the mind to remain undistracted, which is called mindfulness. This is what mindfulness really means, even though it's now been, disseminated out across the modern culture. It doesn't mean a lot of, well, it means many things, but fundamentally this is what it means, is that it's the capacity of our consciousness mind, our mind, to remain undistracted. So we have to strengthen that capacity. So one way of doing that is, for example, when a thought arises, don't add to that thought. Notice that it's a thought and let go. Let go of it. As soon as you recognize a thought as a thought, let go into its nature. And what that means is letting go into its nature just means you don't continue with the energy of the thought. You unhook from it. And in that instant, it dissolves. It dissolves. It can't maintain itself as soon as it's recognized for what it is. The true nature of a thought, empty, vivid appearance. Empty, vivid appearance that arises and dissolves. That's the nature of a thought. And so our intention in shamatha is to be present, to rest loosely. This is like, I for years I thought shamatha was like, you're present, but it feels like a really tense kind of situation, because you're trying to be so vigilant and, not getting caught. And then that just builds more and more tension in the body and the mind. And actually the mind becomes wilder and wilder. So important, very important, remember the instruction to rest loosely, which might mean that for a while your experience is that you're sort of falling into this kind of lassitude or sleepiness. And then you have to kind of wake yourself up again. You have to bring your attention, sort of vivify your intention. And in the winter retreat, I talked a little bit about the idea of non-distraction, non-fabrication, non-meditation, which are the three stages of Mahamudra practice. And right now, again, with shamatha, we're working with non-distraction specifically. We are working, the others are there, but they're not the main focus, non-distraction. So when a thought occurs, you let go and you rest there. And what do we notice? Well, the first thing we notice is how very addictive and seductive our thoughts are. It's challenging, actually, to let go of a thought, a compelling thought, because we're addicted to our thoughts. And we're addicted to the whole somatic, emotional, psychological, and intellectual experience when a thought arises. Even the unpleasant ones, right? There's something very compelling and familiar to our thoughts and the way they flow. And it's actually another way that we believe in the existence of I, me, and mine. It's another selfing device. We may even really dislike certain flows of thought, certain streams of thought that we get caught into that are like negative, negative, denigrating thought streams, and yet we're still addicted to them because we're addicted to the drama around the I that is not good enough, that is, blah, 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 whatever it is. And it's the story of me. And whether it's a good story or a bad story or a happy story or a sad story, it's still what we identify with as me. So we always say, you are not your thoughts. You are not your thoughts. It's actually much deeper than just, I don't have to get caught in my thoughts. It's like, I am not my thoughts. It just opens up a realm of possibilities of okay, well then what? What? But every time you let go of a thought, and shamatha is a way of learning how to let go of thoughts. So when you rest the mind with the sensation at the base of the body in earth shamatha practice, and a thought arises, if you're very much, if your mindfulness has become strong, you maintain that sense of the sensation and your connection to it, and yet you're aware a thought has arisen, and you simply let go. You let go and the thought dissolves. And eventually, that process leads to an experience that we call thought-free clarity. Thought-free clarity. So it's where the background of the thoughts, the other place that you're inhabiting, which we might call a watcher, but it's, and that's another thing we'll work with in Vipassana, is this notion of the watcher. But it's there's a kind of clarity there, a lot of kind of sharp, clear vividness. And in that experience, that thought-free clarity, the more you hang out in that, it eventually turns into your nature. I mean, turns into isn't the right way, but it kind of, it's like a small vessel that you ride into the vast ocean, right? So you're learning how to rest in your vessel, and the more you rest there, the more you begin to dissolve out into the vast ocean. So thought-free clarity alone isn't natural awareness, isn't Rigpa in its full-blown experience, but it's the key condition for natural awareness to dawn in our experience, such that we recognize it, for what it is. So I hope that's a little helpful for this first part, for the reading in Khampa Rinpoche's book. And I know that from here, we go into talking about shamatha with an object. And we're going to be working with that over the next month, which is holding our attention, instead of holding it to the sensation in the body now, we're going to use the visual sense. So we were using the touch sense, the feeling sense for the earth body shamatha. Now we're going to use the visual, our sight sense, as a way to strengthen mindfulness. Because when you rest your vision, your sight on an object, it again provides you with an anchor, a way to stay present, a way to keep staying present. So as you get swept away by distraction, so you come back to this presence, this focus, this attention on the object. And the one thing I'll just say about this, and I'm sure that this has been talked about in your groups if you've already met, or will be talked about, is that you're not taking your eyes and burning them into this object, because you'll start to have all kinds of visual distortions that will happen. And your object, you'll see 10 objects or 3 objects, or things will be blurry, or it's like in the same way that you noticed the sensation at the base of the body, here you're just resting the gaze on the object, just resting it there, not talking to yourself about the object, just resting. And your gaze is very relaxed and soft. And yet your attention is focused. You're there. But you don't have to strain your eyes. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Because that will be a distraction, actually, if you do that. So it can take a little bit of just playing around with it in the beginning to notice the difference between really straining to hold your vision to the object, and relaxing with just resting the gaze on the object. But don't give up. Just continue, and it will get easier. And I think I will probably just stop now. That was an hour, and I don't want to take more of your time. But I hope that you enjoy the practice, and truly the benefits of shamatha are quite profound, and touching into it every day, if you can, even for 5 or 10 minutes, will begin to again generate a kind of habit that your mind will recognize and will come back to more and more easily as time goes on. It's like any habit, right? If you only do it once, it's harder to recognize, it's harder for it to have any momentum. So you want to give it enough energy that it begins to have its own momentum. And eventually it can become so powerful that all you have to do is sit down. Maybe you don't even have to sit down, but let's say you sit down for a session and you are going to just be present, non-distractedly present. You have that intention, as Anam Tupten was saying, you have that intention, and immediately you have that attention. And you don't have to try. It's just you're present. You're present. And whatever arises, unfolds, and dissolves. And you are aware. You're completely aware, but you're not hooked. So I wish you all positive and peaceful and joyful practice. And I look forward to seeing whoever shows up at the summer retreat and see my own MARGHA group on Sunday. So my love to all of you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.